hope you've booked this room for a long time, because this is my last speech in the United States on this trip, and I have a lot to say. And although he didn't speak but will speak at the convention, I want to recognize another hero of mine in the audience today. The Vietnam veteran on whose book and on whose life the great movie Born on the 4th of July was made, the great Ron Kovic, ladies and gentlemen, the great Ron Kovic. Ron Kovic, who lost the use of his legs in an imperial war that cost the lives of millions of people, 58,000 of them your own fellow citizens. A war which left hundreds of thousands of American citizens wounded and maimed, hundreds of thousands more mentally damaged, living on the streets, filling the prisons, murdering other people, killing their wives, killing themselves, not to mention the millions of Vietnamese, Cambodian, Laotian people that war killed, and the death and destruction that it wrought in Southeast Asia. I was in Vietnam some years ago. I visited the labor wards where children are still being born today deformed because of the use of chemical weapons by the United States Air Force, dropping Agent Orange on their villages, their fields, and their forests. Ron Kovic lost the use of his legs, but he found his voice and a heart like a lion, and he's fought against every single war ever since, including this war against the Palestinian people. And I have something to say about him later as well. That was just for starters. Now, the idea of this convoy came to me as I was walking with 100,000 other people on the streets of London, with the snow falling, darkness closing in, on January the 10th, on our way as we were making our way every day and every night. On January the 10th, in the middle of this great atrocity, this great crime that took place between the 27th of December and 22 days and nights. As I was walking on this mammoth demonstration, the biggest demonstration for Palestine ever held in the United Kingdom, I realized that marching, while necessary, was not sufficient. Not sufficient. We had to do something more. We had to do something longer, more effective, that would gather more attention, would concentrate more minds, would give more people the possibility of personally interacting rather than merely passively receiving speeches from leaders, from platforms. Something that would impact not just in Britain, but in the Arab world. And I decided that I would announce from the platform that day, as I did. And you can see it again on YouTube. Wallahi, this YouTube is fantastic for us. Wallahi. This internet has changed the world. No longer are we in the hands of Rupert Murdoch and Fox News or Conrad Black. We can find the truth. We can seek the truth. We can speak the truth, whether they like it or not. We will never turn back that tide, and we must develop it and deepen it. Again, a subject to which I shall return. I announced from that platform. So you think I'm forgetting all these subjects to which I shall return, but when you play back this video, you'll realize I returned to every single one of the points that I made. I announced that we were going to take a convoy from Britain to Gaza. And in 3 weeks, we had gathered 110 British trucks, ambulances, fire engines, vans, medicine, wheelchairs, children's nappies, biscuits, flour, blankets for the 61,000 Palestinian families whose homes were destroyed in 22 days. Can you imagine? 61,000 homes in 22 days destroyed in that bombardment. Blankets for them, tents for them. We gathered 110 vehicles, 350 British volunteers, and $2 million worth of aid in just 3 weeks. And on St. Valentine's Day, we set off from Hyde Park in London with love for Palestine. It was a long and difficult journey. 10,000 kilometers, 8 countries, sleeping in our vehicles almost every night, driving until it was late, sleeping a few hours, sitting up in our cars. But we passed through countries that hated the sight of us, regimes that didn't want us to be there, but couldn't stop us because of the head of steam, because of the momentum which we had by then developed. They tried everything they could. They made us avoid the towns and the cities. Traffic congestion, you see. They took us down desert roads. They deployed their army and their police to stop people seeing us. But the people pushed through anyway, pushing through the police, pushing through the soldiers to touch the convoy, to give us biscuits for Gaza, to hold up their babies, to be kissed by the convoy, to spread the barakat amongst their families. It didn't matter what these regimes said. The people in their countries loved Palestine and wanted to be with us on that convoy. Women were taking off their wedding rings and forcing them through the windows of the cars, saying, "Take this to Gaza, sell it, melt it, do anything, give it to Gaza." An old man in Algeria begged me to take him in the back of my van. I told him, "I sleep in the back of that van. There's no room in the back of that van. And you don't have a passport. And you're a fellahin. They're not short of fellahin in Gaza. They don't need you there. What do you want to do when you get there?" He said, "I just want them to know that when they cry, we are crying with them, and when they bleed, we are bleeding with them." And that was true in every country, in every person that we met, every person who forced their way through the efforts of their regimes to keep us away from them. And finally, we reached the great Egypt. The heart, oh really, wallahi, Egypt is a great, great country, and the Egyptian people are a great, great people. It's not their fault they have the government they have. They didn't choose it after all. Well, only 99.9% of them did. People said to me, "Why didn't you sail this material to Alexandria and drive quickly to Rafah?" I said, "Because I wanted to give the Egyptian government plenty of time to think about us. Plenty of time to know that we were coming. Plenty of time to know what the cost would be if they treated us like they treated Denis Kucinich and other people who've headed for that border since this aggression began. Plenty of time to know that when they were dealing with us, they were dealing with people who came in peace. Peace for all the Arab regimes. I made this clear in Hyde Park. We come in peace, but we will not be stopped." And when we reached the little town of Al-Arish, some kind of schizophrenia developed. When we crossed the Egyptian border at Saloum from Libya, where, thanks to the Gaddafi Foundation and its leader, Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, they doubled the size of our convoy from 110 to 220 vehicles. A massive convoy about 5 miles long. This convoy was about 5 miles long by the time it reached Al-Arish. And they made us stop in a car park. And what a night. One night in Al-Arish would make a great road movie, actually, but it's not as exotic as it sounds. It's a desperately dissatisfying place for this convoy to make its final rest before we headed for Gaza. The Egyptian government, which had declared to its own people that we were their guests of the ruling party in Egypt, guests of the National Democratic Party in Egypt, which had held up pictures of the president behind me at every stop, in every speech, in every interview I gave, which helped us, which paid for our petrol even, suddenly asked me to go to Rafah ahead of the convoy, and when I got to Rafah, they asked me to cross into Palestine without the convoy. I told them I came all this way with a convoy. I'm not going to walk naked into Palestine without a convoy. They said, well, there are some problems with the convoy back in the car park in Al-Arish. I said, I refuse to cross. I got out of my vehicle, I spread my sleeping bag on the ground, and I lay down. And all the cameras started taking pictures. And they got quite spooked about that. I told them I'm staying here until the convoy arrives. They said, well, maybe you'd better go back to the car park and see what's happening. When we got back to the car park, I found that my friends were surrounded by 1,000 Egyptian police, and that they were insisting that Egyptian officials go through each and every one of these vehicles and separate out that material which could go through Rafah from the material which would have to go through the Israeli checkpoints. I told them, we won't be going through the Israeli checkpoints at all. You can forget this. They said, you have to coordinate with Israel. I said, I never coordinated with Israel in my whole life. I'm not going to start now. I'm not going to start now. They said, well, this material has to be separated. I said, in that case, we'll put all the material back on the trucks, and I will lead this convoy all the way back through Egypt, back to Libya, and you can explain to your people why we didn't cross with this aid into Palestine. Well, they didn't fancy that either. So we reached a compromise. In the darkness of the night, in this car park in Al-Arish, their officials took off all the vehicles, that which should be taken off, and then turned their backs and said, quickly, put it back on again. And so the next morning, we drove to Palestine with every last biscuit, every last blanket, every last tent, all the things that they wanted taken off. We took them through Rafah. Which is another lesson, you see. You have to face these people. You have to face these challenges and not to kneel before them. And we entered Palestine. By the grace of God, on the 9th of March, on the birthday of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and kissed the holy ground of Palestine. 350 British people, most of them never been to Palestine before, kissed the ground and were received by hundreds of thousands of Palestinian people in Gaza. Virtually the entire population of the Gaza Strip came out to receive this convoy. And we were very happy to be there, but only briefly. Because what quickly became visible in the morning was the sheer scale of the devastation which had been wrought upon the 1.5 million Palestinians locked up in that concentration camp called Gaza. It was unique in many respects, that 22-day aggression. It's the only war in modern history, if you can call it a war, when one country has an air force, a navy, and all the most sophisticated weapons that can be produced, and the others have no army, no navy, no air force, no anti-aircraft guns, only Kalashnikovs to fight F-16s, only homemade rockets to fight Apache helicopters and warships. But it was the only war in recent history where the population had nowhere to flee, nowhere to run. In normal wars, the civilians can run away, can hide. Israel took the precaution of locking all the gates before they began their bombardment. They told the international media, which was locked outside, that they were sending SMSs to Palestinians, telling them to flee. They were dropping leaflets from their aeroplanes before they bombed, telling the people to flee. But there was nowhere to flee. Gaza is 25 miles long and 2.5 miles wide, with 1.5 million people, with all the doors locked. It's the most densely populated piece of earth on the planet. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. And what devastation they brought to bear. Gaza looks like an earthquake scene. The difference being, if it had been an earthquake, all the governments of the world would be rushing to come to the aid of the victims of the earthquake. They'd be rushing the reconstruction material to rebuild the lives and the communities that were destroyed. But because these victims are Palestinians whose blood is cheapest of all, because those killed and wounded and maimed and orphaned in this war were nameless, faceless Palestinians, because the earthquake was a man-made political earthquake launched by Israelis, not only is there no aid, no reconstruction, the siege that I'm talking about has been tightened, the noose has been closed around the necks of the people who suffered that bombardment. Thousands were killed and maimed for the rest of their lives. I don't like this phrase, wounded. Ron will know what I'm talking about. It's like in the cowboy films, you're wounded. You can put your arm in a sling, and by the end of the picture, you're firing your gun again. These people who were maimed in these attacks are maimed forever. Their lives destroyed forever. Their future gone. Those who were killed, those who were maimed, those who were orphaned, run into thousands. And we saw, now that we have this freedom in the media, thanks to the internet, thanks to Al Jazeera, thanks to Press TV, we saw the kind of crimes. We saw that little girl burned black by the sun as she lay dead in Zaytuna, outside in the sun for 3 days. We saw the ambulance man hold her body up when they were finally able to recover her. Apart from her arm and her leg, eaten by the dogs roaming in the rubble, as Omar was saying in his poem. We saw the little girl, again in Zaytuna, found dead still suckling on the toe of her dead mother. Keep these images in your mind. And remember that this great war crime was committed on our watch while we were watching on television. We saw the gas, imagine, gas being dropped by a country calling itself, not that we accept it, but calling itself the Jewish state, dropping gas on civilians. White phosphorus gas. I've seen it before. I was in Beirut in 1982 with President Arafat when Israel invaded and occupied an Arab capital and reduced it brick by brick to rubble and ash. I went to the hospitals. I saw the children, victims of Israel's first use of phosphorus weapons. White smoke coming from the nose and the mouth of the victims because their bodies are cooking from the inside. That's what this weapon does. You breathe it in and then you bake from the inside until you're dead. And we saw it on TV happening. In fact, they even dropped it on a United Nations building. And the pictures are there. A clear, obvious, brazen war crime. It's illegal to use this weapon. Have any of them been charged with war crimes? No, the only war crimes charge is for Bashir in Sudan. They watched Israel commit these crimes and then they charged Bashir. And they will never be charged. Trust me on that. In fact, the butchers who carried out this barbarism over those 22 days, the media and the political class then told us in the general election which immediately followed that they were the moderates. Livni, we were supposed to hope that Livni was elected. She who with Barak and Olmert committed all these crimes, they were the moderates. And if we didn't succeed in seeing them elected, an even more desperate group of killers and murderers would come to power. And so it came to pass. They killed and destroyed and maimed all of this to get re-elected. And still they failed. And now Israel has a government led by fascists. Netanyahu and Lieberman in any other country, in any other time, would be wearing swastikas and jackboots. They're fascists, fascist killers. Hillary's going to have a difficult job kissing Lieberman, the man who wants to ethnically cleanse not just the Palestinian occupied territories, but even the Israeli citizens of Palestinian origin within their borders will be asked to sign an oath that Israel is a Jewish country. Can you imagine? Just try to imagine asking black Americans to sign an oath that America was a white country. Unimaginable. But that's the policy of the new foreign minister of Israel. And if he can get his way, that's exactly what will happen. Would we tolerate any other country in the world whose government had such a policy? Would we queue up to give them money and guns and recognition and red carpets? We would shun them. When Austria elected a fascist, Haider, now gone, a couple of years ago, the entire European Union boycotted Austria, wouldn't sit down with Austria in any European Union meeting. And quite right. Is Hillary going to kiss Lieberman? Is President Obama going to conduct business as usual? No, I don't believe so, and we mustn't accept so. With such a government of killers and ethnic cleansers, These are big questions for the American people. This death and destruction that we found in Gaza just a few weeks ago is cruel and desperate. But I tell you, the siege is much worse. At least when they were being bombed, it was on the news. When the bombing stopped, you didn't hear about Gaza and its suffering at all. But the people's situation is absolutely desperate.